What's going on, everybody? My name is Branson Brooks, a contributor for the DC Voice, and I have the pleasure of speaking with Derek Gray, the author of the NAACP in Washington, D.C., from Jim Crow to Home Rule, and an archivist and historian in D.C. It's a pleasure to be able to speak with you, Mr. Gray.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you. The pleasure is mine. And just to get the thing started, kind of talking about the book and its kind of inspiration, what inspired you to focus specifically on the NAACP's role in Washington, D.C.?
Okay, great question. So I'm an archivist here at DC Public Library in the People's Archive, which serves as our local special collections research center. And the inspiration for the book came primarily from our library users, actually.
Oh, wow.
Um, I've been with the library since 2008, and so I was you field a lot of different reference questions at the desk, and I just became fascinated with the topic when people were coming in researching the civil rights movement in DC. And we do have a lot of materials, but we do not have the um, records of the NAACP, the national or the branch. And I'm not from DC, so I was also interested in the civil rights movement in Washington. And you automatically think of like the NAACP during the 50s and the 60s, and primarily operating in the South. But DC was a Jim Crow city, and um, the NAACP did operate a branch here. So again, the idea came to me from fielding all those questions, and I found myself directing our customers to other institutions. So the Library of Congress has the national and the NAACP papers, records in their archives. Um, and then also there's a large percentage of DC branch NAACP records at Howard University at in the Moreland Springer Research Center. So I just um, I know, sorry, this is a long answer,
You're fine.
um,
You're
but
fine.
I looked to see if there was any work done on the DC branch, and there wasn't.
Oh,
And I said, okay, well, I think this is something that I'd like to work on. And yes, I started researching it, and that was 2015, and the book came out in 2022. And I ended the research right around the time of right before COVID, actually.
wow.
And then my editor was like, "Well, you're everyone's on lockdown. You're at home, so you better start writing." But yeah, so it became it was the first all black NAACP branch, and it primarily came about due to what was going on in Washington, D.C. when President Woodrow Wilson came into office in 1913 and drastically reshaped the federal government by segregating um, the federal workforce. And uh, that was the impetus, if you will, of of uh, the work of the branch, because when it did form in March of 1912, it was struggling with some internal issues and leadership issues. But Wilson coming into office, the branch, and it really galvanized um, around that issue.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And it kind of is. interesting and good that you took it upon yourself to make that book, kind of detailing the first the NAACP branch in DC, kind of being that it is the capital of the US. So the fact that we didn't really have any information on an organization like that being formed in a capital in a city that means so much is something that was definitely needed to be produced. So that's great that you took it upon yourself to kind of put that add to the history of books. That's something that probably should have been there a long time ago.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. Um, yeah. So, and it was just, it was just a lot of, it was very rewarding to do the work and I was just very, intrigued by what I was finding. And, it's a long history, because pretty much what I argue is how it, um, how it began and how it declined. Um, and what I mean by that was it was almost like a bookend. When the branch formed, some more militant forces in the Black community in Washington did not think that it would survive. Uh, One of its main critics was William Calvin Chase, who was editor of the Washington Bee, which was a very radical paper. And he did not trust the movement. He did not trust W.E.B. Du Bois, who was, a member and a primary leader in the national NAACP, because he thought the NAACP was, founded by progressive whites, and he just did not believe that that type of movement, even if Black people were allied with it, it would thrive in the district. And then at the end of the book, which is pretty much the 70s, by that time, the conditions in DC the landscape had changed, where traditional civil rights leadership was people were asking for more. So with the rise of the Black Power movement and Stokely Carmichael, Julius Hobson, these folks were arguing that the branch could not meet the needs of Black Washingtonians. So that was just something that that's what I wanted to make the narrative of the book around.
Okay. And yeah, when I read kind of chapter where it said the resistance from the Black and white press, I kind of got in to see that Chase was one of the ones that were kind of more so against the NAACP. And like you said, when a high stature, a high major person, especially someone who kind of runs the promotion or the kind of outlook of how people will see the NAACP kind of against the movement, it is something you do have to fight in the long run. So that definitely was interesting to see. And you kind of talked about as well, or you just talked about the beginning of the NAACP and how it was formed. And so that was something I wanted to get into as well. I know the first meeting took place at a church. I believe it was Bethel AME. And I just kind of wanted to talk about the research that went into that, because there was heavy hitters that attended the meeting. You talked about Joe Spingard, who attended the meeting, and I know the boys were supposed to go, but I believe he wasn't able to make it at that point. So can you just talk about the research that went into that initial meeting and how it kind of how that went in general, just kind of finding out about the um kind of the establishment of the NAACP at first instance.
Yeah, good question. The so a lot of the uh, folks who ended up joining or establishing the DC branch were involved in the Niagara movement, which came before the NAACP. And when the branch formed in DC, it had no, it was very small. It had no constitution, a couple of executive officers. And it was led by a gentleman named John Milton Waldron, who was pastor of Shiloh Baptist Church, and he had been involved in, he had a great resume. He had been involved in the Niagara movement. He was the treasurer. He was head of the Alley Improvement Association. So he had given, and he was in New York with the formation of the national chapter. So then he comes to DC and was one of the founding members. But it did for they had their first meeting at Metropolitan AME Church, because it was so close to the White House, and it was also large enough to accommodate a large meeting of that size.
Yeah.
And that it also had, that's also where the Bethel Historical Association was meeting at the time. So it was the perfect venue for that. A lot of the early officers and members came out of Howard University, deans and law school professors, and that was in my research, I found that was one of the criticisms that the branch faced throughout the history that I cover in the book. That it was that it for some it did not appeal to various other elements in the Black community. The Black community is not monolithic. It's very broad, and this organization was very it was almost like the Black elite were the members.
Yeah.
Like middle class, upper class. So like in like particularly like in the 60s, there were some who were arguing that it was almost a little like out of touch with the Black poor and things of that nature. But yes, a lot of the founding members had come out of Howard University.
Okay. And yeah, that did something is something I wanted to touch on as well. I did see the word elite used a lot in the book, especially the first initial chapters or really throughout the whole book, like you said. So I was wondering if that was like a purposeful thing you were trying to emphasize, like that it was more so started by the elite members of the Black community and kind of, and as you said, maybe it did kind of rub some other people in the Black community a lot of way because they had things they wanted to deal with and get answered for it in the government. So that's definitely something I wanted to touch on as well.
Yeah, so it was pretty much like that throughout you know, from the time it was founded to when I ended in the 70s. Um, and you know, there were many uh, you know uh, opportunities that I think that um, the I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. There were many opportunities where uh, the branch leadership could have done a better job in trying to shed um, that that look, that label, if you will.
Mhm.
Better example was, and it was very interesting, the fight um, in 1916 to prevent the showing of the racist film Birth of a Nation
Mhm.
in DC. Now, because the branch's preferred approach was, fight this in the courts, get appeal to the district commissioners to try to stop to stop the showing of the film, which is, it's a racist film.
Mhm.
So my point is that there were other branches all over and I talk about it in the book, other branches all over the country that due to uh, protests outside the theaters where Birth of a Nation was shown, or other like street protests and street actions and demonstrations. Those branches were far more successful. Like in some cities, they were able to make sure that they stopped the showing of the film at certain theaters, or they got certain scenes deleted. Whereas in DC, that did not happen. In fact, I mean, there were some elements in the branch that they wanted like far more radical approaches. I mean, I recall that there was one meeting that they had where they met and they were like, what do we do about this? How do we stop this film? And there were some some members who advocated that where the film where the theater where the film was going to be shown, that it be detonated. Like they were like endorsing like bombing the building. And obviously, the branch leadership were like, no, we're not going to do that. We're not like a terrorist organization. But other more, like the other some Black radical papers in the city, they embraced it. They were like, yeah, you sometimes you need violence to make a point. John Brown at Harper's Ferry had proved that, when Nat Turner led the rebellion in Virginia against slavery in 1831, he had proven that. So I guess my point is that, it was the push and pull about what type of a direction should the branch take. And there was a jockeying back and forth of embracing militancy versus also like a moderate uh, conservatism, if you will, which is why I really I enjoyed, you know, writing about Neville Thomas in the book, who I argued was he was the most radical um, branch president in the time period that I covered in the book.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, it definitely comes to time. Like we've even seen in cases like as we know the prominent Martin Luther King, where he even had to balance whether because he was more so a person who stood for peace, but at the same time, there were times where he did have to get on the front line and kind of toe that line between just more so having peace and more so going towards that radical movement, radical style, as you said. So it definitely comes to a point where you have to kind of be on the front line because as we seen before, you can fight stuff in court, but by that time a lot of the stuff can happen in between those kind of time you're fighting in court. They're still going to be playing the movie Birth of the Nation, as you said, as they're fighting it in
Exactly.
court. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And
Hmm.
kind of just talking about because that was obviously probably an unexpected discovery that you found in terms of they were thinking about kind of detonating one of the movie theaters. So
Yeah.
kind of just bouncing off that, what was some more kind of surprising or unexpected discoveries that you made during your research on writing the book?
Uh, and one thing that I did discover that was kind of shocking was how when the DC branch pretty much organized the Prayer Pilgrimage for Freedom in 1957, which was when Dr. King uh, first appeared on the national stage, um, when he spoke at the Lincoln Memorial, which is something, unfortunately, it's a history a lot of people don't know. The I Have a Dream speech was not the first, but the branch got pretty much no love during that event. None of the speakers on the stage were from the branch. The branch was not represented at all. Nannie Helen Burroughs, famous Washington, D.C. civil rights activist. She had been in planning the prayer pilgrimage, she was not allowed to speak. So you know, the, that was a bit of a shock. So a lot of the work that was done by the branch often was overlooked, or overshadowed by the national office or from you know, elements in the city.
From what you found, were they trying their best to get through on that platform, especially when a speaker or a speaker or a figure like Martin Luther King was obviously garner the people at the Lincoln Memorial? Were they trying their best to get on that platform as well, knowing there would be a lot of people watching, and it's just something that wasn't, more so, I guess, approved?
I don't know. I think it was that um, what surprised me about Nannie Helen Burroughs not being there was that had um, she knew King very well, and she knew the King family, and she supported a lot of his, you know, causes. And she was writing to him years before um, the prayer pilgrimage even took place, to the
Yeah.
point where she was actually also, because she ran a school up here in DC, she actually was wrote to King telling him that if there are um, teachers down south that he knew of who were being fired because of their membership in the NAACP, she was telling him, send them to DC to my school so I can help them and get them jobs.
Oh,
So my
wow.
point is like she was so heavily involved in the planning, in the planning of the event and all the logistics, but um it's she was, and as other women were excluded. And that was another thing that I found, like the almost like a sexism within the civil rights apparatus. Um, you know, that was also the case with um, even more like poignantly when the ranch tried to fight the construction of the Mammy Monument in the 20s. Um, you know, it was like all male dominated leadership, and they supported, you know, this construction of this Black Mammy being in DC. And Marriage Church Terrell, she was a member, and she was not happy about that as a member of the branch, and she criticized the men for it and pushed back on that, wrote letters to the Washington Evening Star, um, and pretty much called out these men for being okay with this. Um, so, but again, that conservative male leadership within these ranks, versus what the women were having to go through.
More so how you use your position and kind of your experience as an archivist and a historian to kind of influence your approach to this book and kind of find these missing pieces of information.
Sure, yeah. So, because I would often tell people I kind of know, I don't, sometimes I go back and forth with what was more enjoyable, the research experience or the writing.
Probably the reason.
Yeah, I'd say the research was, because I've been working as a research archivist for many years, but you have to take the time to really dive into the records, um, and it can be frustrating because it's a tree. It's like or an octopus with tentacles. Like one thing leads to another. And I practically lived at the Library of Congress, and shout out to the Library of Congress and the folks at Howard University Moreland Springer Research Center. Staff at both institutions they were great. They were telling me about, I mean, they were very helpful. they even told me about things that I had not even thought to look at. They were like, "Oh, you should look at this too." Um, so, uh, but you know, it takes time, but you have to be patient. But I looked at you know, uh, there were just so many places that were so helpful because you have to like go where the records are, but also look at material that form the narrative um, of the story as well. And that was archival collections and newspapers, oral histories. At some one point, I even went back outside of DC to the Library of Virginia, where I used to work, because there was some uh, material related to the some Confederate material, from Sons of Confederate Veterans, and some Confederate collections that I had to look at, and some uh, governor's papers in the '60s when I was looking at how the branch its role in the March on Washington, because they at the time the American Nazi Party was headquartered in Arlington, Virginia, and the leader had written the governor of Virginia asking him to try to stop this Dr. King and stop the march. And I went down there and basically found some information where uh, the governor of Virginia in 1962 said, "No, we're not going to do that. You're kind of yeah, we're no, we're yeah, yeah. We're yeah. Basically, he was like, yeah, we might be for segregation, but you're just a little too crazy."
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah. So, but anyway, my point is like how far the research can take you, and I really enjoyed that.
okay, okay. And I bet, as you said, kind of already being in the role of a archivist and historian, that kind of more so you had the help of more or less Spingarn Center and kind of just other people, outside people helping you, but kind of just having that kind of, I would say, base already built in probably just helped out even more just to be able to uncover things that you kind of didn't think about before.
Yeah, because that's pretty much like, not to sound cheesy about it, but that's the joy of what I do every day. Um, People come into the library searching looking for information on all different types of topics, whether, looking at their neighborhood or looking at um, looking at the civil rights movement in DC or whatever it might be. My joy is, you know, they, meeting them, seeing the help that they need and making sure that, they leave with the answer or they have much more information than when they came in. Um, and also letting them know that it's not easy. A lot of this stuff you just can't Google.
Yeah.
You just can't. Yeah, and some people, they think you can, but you can't. But it's very rewarding. You never know what you're going to find.
Okay. Okay. Definitely. It was, as you said, how we kind of said it seems as though we're rewarding, as we said, being able to add something like this to the history book. So I definitely understand you on that. And kind of just to talk about more of the history, I want to also ask which leaders or figures in the NAACP DC kind of chapter stood out to you as unappreciated or overlooked, kind of in its more so origin and kind of beginning runnings.
Yeah, I think and I mentioned him before. I'd have to say Neville Thomas. Um, he was a history at, sorry, he was a history teacher at Dunbar High School, and it kind of jumped out at me because my parents were teachers, and before at one point I considered, teaching history before, my career in archives. But he stands out because nothing has been written about him. I would argue that a biography needs to be done on him. But he was from Ohio, um, attended Howard, did obtain a law degree, but he was a teacher at Dunbar High School for 30 years and just was a very passionate activist for Black freedom and civil rights. And again, just really um, wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo. I mean, he made a lot of enemies, but it was because of his passion. I mean, there was this the back and forth with him and W.E.B. Du Bois, for example. It was crazy. He was not a fan. He did not think that Du Bois was like stepping up. He thought he was using the because Du Bois edited The Crisis. He thought that Du Bois was using The Crisis for his own personal, you know, thing. And a lot of leaders in Washington pushed back against him because of what he was uh, trying to do. He was uh, even trying to not only desegregate certain facilities in DC, but also make sure that they started hiring Black people.
Wow.
So, which is what he was always like. It's one thing to tear down Jim Crow, but you also need to like hire folks. So he literally like worked himself to death. He died very young. He was 56. But he was just very, very passionate. And I just think that looking at what's been written uh, for DC history and Black DC history, there's nothing on him. And I think partly because unfortunately there doesn't seem to be a cache of personal papers anywhere for him. There's no archive. I haven't found anything. I'm still looking. But yeah, I'd say he emerged as the main person that almost was like my uh, favorite person in the book or hero.
Okay, okay. Shout out Neville Thomas. I
Yeah.
know I was gonna say definitely just in terms of kind of being able to recover paper and things of that sort. It did seem like there was a lot or even more than a handful of newspapers that in Washington, D.C. or that were in the book that I definitely there's no recollection of now. So maybe even those would like we talked about the Washington Bee, for example. I know that would probably do some service in being able to find archives and kind of more so tales of leaders like of Neville Thomas, but it definitely is interesting to see that he was more so about the integration, not only the desegregation of the Black community and the white community. He more so wanted to really start inputting the people from the Black community into spaces that they weren't more so afforded. So that makes a lot of sense as well. This reflecting on the DC chapter of the NAACP, kind of how do you see the legacy of the chapter in DC reflected in what kind of, as we just talked about, reflected in modern political movements or in current debates over DC statehood as they stand right now?
Mm. Well, I ended it in I ended it when I did because the records were not made available to me. Um, so I'll just say that it's a relevant organization to the continuing fight for issues. But that's all I'll say.
Okay, okay. And I mean, I guess I know that's it. So I would say, is there, you feel, would you say it's still more so have from what you've seen is it has more so kept its mission in terms of trying to be able to be that driving force in DC, or do you feel like it's kind of with the records not being there and you not being able to see what they're doing internally, it's kind of hard to say, as you said.
Yeah, it's hard to say because I really would have liked to have done something like from its founding to present. But again, yeah, I had to end it when I did.
Okay.
Trying to
Okay.
be, I'm just trying to be
Okay.
diplomatic.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
That makes sense. And yeah, it definitely would have, like you said, been nice to kind of continue it from when it was started to now. But as you said, it was kind of hard to even get the information that you did and kind of be able to put that in the history book. So I
sure.
definitely understand how that kind of what's it called was more so played a factor in not being able to kind of lead it to this point. And
Hmm.
kind of just reflecting, I guess, kind of just for a more so closeout question, kind of just reflecting on the whole book. How do you feel that it kind of it made influence how you feel like you've kind of been able to spread the notion of the DC NAACP, especially with people who weren't so familiar with it to begin with? Because as you said, kind of even in the interview, there's tidbits that weren't even more so on the forefront for people in present day. So how has that kind of come to fruition?
Well, I just, glad I had the opportunity to do it. I think it was an important story, an important narrative in the long, rich history of civil rights activism in DC. And I just wanted to make sure that the organization got its credit. Um, one thing that like one of its main um, accomplishments was, and again, going against many odds, was how like I said, it was founded to fight segregation in the Wilson era. Um, that did not happen, but the branch also was able to torpedo a lot of very vicious Jim Crow legislation that was coming from the Congress in DC. So it was it was a split victory, if you will. Segregation in the federal government, it did continue, but there were a lot of uh, Jim Crow bills requiring segregated streetcars in the city, anti-interracial marriage laws, and a lot of those different types of things. That was all uh, the the branch took the lead in making sure none of that happened. Um, so again, so again, just adding to the story of uh, you know, uh, you know, civil rights activism in DC, and again, like the even more broadly, a history that a lot of people might not think is there. And I guess what I'm trying to say is like it's local Washington, but also federal Washington, and it's that the local story that I wanted to focus on. Right. And also that I'm glad you made that point. And also I just wanted to make sure that we end by I wanted to say that you know, a lot of these leaders that are mentioned in the mentioned, particularly when Dr. King came to DC and was advocating for DC civil rights causes and so forth, these folks they shaped him. They shaped his views, and he did as well. So I guess my point is like the legacy of King needs to include these, these folks like Nannie Helen Burroughs and
Yeah.
Eugene Davidson and all the other folks that are mentioned. I just wanted to I guess I'm saying he obviously didn't do it alone.
Yeah.
And a lot of the work that he supported and that he when he came had already been started by these folks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely their connection, as you said, need to be more so promoted, especially
Hmm.
having talked about with Martin Luther King and Thomas having conversations, talking about jobs. That's more so as personal as it gets. So that had to be more so one of his more so closer
Yeah,
people that he helped out with, that helped
exactly.
him kind of do the things he do and kind of get the ideas that he had. So that makes a lot of sense.
Mm.
So again, I appreciate you talking with me, Mr. Gray, and being able to take the time to talk about.
Oh, call me Derek.
I'm
Yeah,
from
yeah.
I'm from the South. I'm
I
from
know,
the
I
South.
know, no.
My bad.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but I appreciate you talking with me, Derek, and
Sure. Thank you.
and I would
Great.
love for people, as we said, to be able to check out your book, The NAACP in Washington, D.C., from Jim Crow to Home Rule. And I appreciate you for taking the time to talk with the DC Voice.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to talk with you.
Great to talk with you as well.
Okay.